Okay, and then I'll start streaming on Facebook as you're giving the update. So yeah, how are things, and is there anything you'd like to share?
Things are good. I got some earrings, new earrings, compliments of Krishangi and Kamalaksha.
Oh, I see, I get it now. I see.
So that's nice. Trying them out. They were highly recommended. Well, I had a very keen insight into an epiphany concerning Nanda Maharaj in the evening Leelas. I wrote it down. I'll read it to you. At this time, the atmosphere at Nandagram is relaxed and social. Yashoda dines casually with her friends while others begin to clean the kitchen, and evening entertainment is just ahead. In the evening, Nanda Baba is the perfect host, and at this time, he has the opportunity to sit with the young Gopas and inquire from them about their adventures in the forest. He advises them and shares his experience. He answers their questions, and when asked, he tells a tale. No one knows how many tales Nanda knows. Practically, there is no Puranic story that he has not committed to memory, and from which he always draws new meaning as he retells such tales. When he instructs the young Gopas, they sit with undivided attention that often ends in astonishment. He loves every cowherd boy as if they were his own son, and their love for him knows no bounds. To sit at his feet or on his lap, from which he allows any Gopa so seated to pull on his beard as he showers Krishna's circle of friends with affection, is to experience the perfection of fatherhood. At such times, every young Gopa idolizes Nanda, and steeped in Suhrit Rati, they desire to be like him, the ideal herdsman. He never scolds anyone, but nonetheless teaches by example. He does not merely know, he knows what to do and does so. Should a bull become unruly, he circles each bull and prays, "You are Dharma, Ahimsa is Dharma. Please bless us." What more can be said about Nanda Baba? Let there be a Nanda Purana. Nanda Maharaj, Ki Jai. Shri Govinda Pal, Ki Jai. So what other questions?
Thank you so much for sharing. That was really beautiful. So there are 6 questions, and the first question is from Brigo.
Okay.
Dandavat Guru Maharaj. I have a question about the 10th of the Nama Aparadas. To not have love for the holy name and to maintain material attachments even after hearing about the glories of the holy name. What does that actually mean, to maintain material attachments? Because usually we hear that by chanting the holy name, material attachments will go away. And there are many examples of this in the Srimad Bhagavatam. But if that is then having material attachment is an aparad, then how can chanting take away such attachments?
I think that the idea there is that through the chanting, it becomes clear to us that we have to move on from certain attachments, that it's time for them to be retired. It becomes clear to us. And at that time, then we should do so. But if instead we don't, we push back and hold on to them, then we don't take advantage of the blessing of the insight coming from the chanting. And so we go against the grace of the name that's revealing that to us. Obviously, everyone has, all sadhakas in the early stages have material attachments. So it's not an offense to have a material attachment, but to maintain it in spite of having not just once, but repeated insight. I mean, the name and the whole practice of sadhana bhakti is showing us a path ahead and revealing to us that which has been our previous preoccupation that's holding us back. So to ignore that and not take advantage of the insight when it becomes clear, that's the way I always looked at that offense. Then it becomes, you're going against the descending insight, inspiration coming from the name. But again, it's gradual. So everyone has material attachments, and it's not an offense to have a material attachment, but to maintain one in spite of, I think that's, again, the idea, clear insight to the issue. Sometimes I've said before, when you pray, you know what to do. Don't pray, or you'll be in trouble. And you know what to do. It becomes clear. So something like that. Don't fight against that when the writing is there on the wall. You should read it, move forward, and be happy as a result of it. What else? Another question?
Umati?
Hare Krishna. My question is from your commentary on in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 8. And the verse is, for the protection of the saintly and destruction of evildoers, as well as for the purpose of establishing Dharma, I manifest in every age. So you're explaining that when the unrighteous are killed by Krishna, that they not only lose their gross material body, they also lose their subtle body. And but they also get a type of liberation, sayuja mukti. But then you go on to say that when, at the demise of their subtle body, at that moment, their dislike for Krishna turns into love for Krishna. So how is it that they would, all of a sudden they love Krishna, so why would they go into sayuja mukti? And then they wouldn't be able to express their love for Krishna.
I think if I remember correctly, I cited Baladev Vijabhushan's Govindabhasha commentary there. If not, that's his insight. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. And I think that it doesn't necessarily apply to every case, but there are a number of examples of this that we find in the Bhagavatam, where it has been determined either in the text itself or by the principal commentators that such and such demon attained sayuja. Not all of them. And there even are some instances, I believe, of attaining sayuja first and then being elevated, if you will, to sarupya. Maybe in the case of Aghasura. And there are a number of them, I don't recall all of them. But that said, it's not necessarily the case that, well, it's not the case, let us say, It is said that who cares from the Gaudiya perspective, who cares for Sayuja, merging in Brahman, which is a form of liberation. It's a very elevated attainment, but comparatively on the scale of possibilities brought about by the grace of Bhagavan, through which is required for any type of liberation. Knowledge alone can't give us liberation because it's, as the Gita explains, a function under the influence of sattva guna. It can show us the way, it can make it clear to us, but we need something from the nirguna to go there in any capacity, even to merge with Brahman, or to attain, in Gaudiya terminology, Sayuja Mukti, which is not desirable from the Gaudiya perspective, wherein possibility of greater intimacy with Bhagavan is comes to light. So you know that, but the point I'm making is that while Sayuja Mukti is sometimes described as hellish, even, for example, by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, this is a comparative analysis that he's making. He says, Akasha Pushpa, the world of material desires and the possibilities of attainment up to even the Brahmaloka is like flowers in the sky. Flowers don't grow in the sky. That's an imaginary dream idea. It's a dream of attainment. You haven't really attained anything. You've only gone further into debt, karmic debt, by any material acquisition. When we take, we owe. So then he goes on to say, and attaining Sayuja, that's like worse than hell. The Gaudiya perspective on it is, well, having gone there, you're going to spend your money, it's done. That's what you've attained. And Swarup Shakti is not functioning within Brahma Sayuja. So what's the possibility? The possibility is extremely remote of ever from there attaining further possibilities in transcendence, greater intimacy with the absolute. So that's a great shame. So extreme statements like Vishwanath have been made about Brahma Sayuja. It is possible to move on, so to speak, within transcendence from Sayuja, but it's very rare. And how will it come about? I mean, it's not, as I say, there's not like devotees going into Brahma Sayuja and fooling around in there, trying to wake people up to the fact that they are Tatastha Jivas still, even though they're merged with Brahman for all intents and purposes. There's not any canvassing there. But as I've said before, it's possible, let us say, for example, that your own spiritual life was inspired originally by someone who had some scars for Brahma Sayuja, for Gyan Marg. And then you came in touch with Chaitanya Bhakti, and the general ideas that we have the common ground, I should say, reincarnation, you're not the body, mukti from material existence, transcendence is the ideal, rather than trying again to make things perfect within the material world. You press down here, it goes up there, it doesn't work, forget it. I'm a transcendentalist. So we have that in common with other schools of transcendental pursuit. So on that common ground, we come in touch with a significant devotee, and then we become inspired for Krishna Bhakti. And then we look at Mukti, Sayuja Mukti, maybe as we were vaguely thinking of it previously as something undesirable. Meanwhile, the original sadhu who inspired us in our spiritual life, as we know of in this particular lifetime, has expired and attained Brahma Sayuja. So as you go forward in bhakti, Actually, you still have some affinity for him or her. Hmm? And as it becomes clear to you what the advantages of bhakti are, in a full sense of the term, not that he or she doesn't have any bhakti, to have a little bhakti to attain sayuja mukti, a little grace. They can't be opposed to bhakti. They can't be against bhakti. So you in your even less advanced stage, nonetheless are endearing yourself to Krishna. And so whoever is dear to you, by extension, becomes dear to him, such is the nature of love psychology. So Krishna may elevate that person from Brahma Sayuja and take him to Vaikuntha, by your grace, by the grace of bhakti. So it's possible. But in a larger sense, what I'm saying is that although Sayuja Mukti is presented as something undesirable, comparatively speaking, from the Gaudiya perspective, it is nonetheless a form of love of God. It's a very abstract form, comparatively, of love of God, even more abstract than the passive adoration of Shantarasa, which is preoccupation with the beatific vision of the form of the Godhead, without concern for his pastimes and his qualities and so forth. This is again a kind of passive adoration, the beatific vision of this. We used to call it Catholicism. Brahma Sayuja would be a liberated state where the form, the condensed form of Satchidananda, Brahman, is not within the purview, within sight, within experience. It's a very restful state. In Brahma Sayuja, the equation of Satchidananda tips heavily towards Sat. So we're loving Ananda to exist without any cessation. When we go to Bhakti, especially Chaitanya Bhakti on the other end of the spectrum, the equation shifts. The Satchidananda is there, but the emphasis is on the Ananda. And the Sat looks like what kind of place is this? A little village of ignorant people, relatively ignorant, coward people. But of course, when you love someone, then you can live under a rock, if you're with them, it doesn't matter. So anyway, the point is that the Ananda, of course, it's the super existence itself, but the Ananda feature is more prominent. So then when you go to yoga, then the Gyan feature is more prominent. But that said, all of these forms of realization, from Sayuja all the way through Vaikuntha to Goloka and Braj, are forms of liberation, and they are some expression of love of God. So Sayuja Mukti is a blessing of Krishna, a blessing of God, blessing of Narayan. So if you are receiving his blessing, then obviously you have some affinity for him, some love for him. So while it's said, who cares for Sayuja? Even the demons attain that. Even Shishupal, who criticized Krishna, attained that. He had seen Krishna his whole life and couldn't appreciate him. But at the end, he saw him for who he was, in an Aishvarya sense, internally, as is described there in that section of the Gita, and drawing as it does in my commentary from Govinda Bhasha of Baladev Vibhusan. His subtle body is purified as well. He understands Krishna for who he is, Bhagavan for who he is, and he gets his blessing. He loves him. Obviously, his love is not like cowherd boys and gopis and so forth, but it's not. It's a form of perfection. That help? I don't want to say Sahuja Mukti ki jai, but Krishna ki jai. He's a valuable gem. So there are many facets to him. You can look at him from one side or another. Next question.
Padmanabha Swami.
See. Sounds like a long one. Yes, I've written about that. And the Nisha Lila, right? Nighttime Lila, which is an example of Krishna's Namasakas participating at times in such Leelas. And let's see what I've said, if I can look it up here briefly, quickly. Of course, in that section, yes. I'll read a little bit. Citing Prema Parabhita in the previous chapter, we saw, that's Raghunath Das Goswami's book, Subal, we saw Subal bring Radha and Krishna at the end of the Pradosh Lila, bring Radha to Krishna at the end of the Pradosh Lila. The Pradosh Lila is followed by the Nisha Lila, so that's the nighttime Lila that typically finds the cowherd boys resting, but in the case of Narmasaka Bhav, it can be present at that time. However, having brought Radha to Krishna, I won't go into that as is described by Raghunath Das Goswami. Subal, having done that, doesn't return home as the Nisha Lila commences thereafter. Along with Vrinda and Tulsi Manjari, Subal remains and relishes the trans-psychological mood swing of Radha as she approaches the gate to the bower and sees her beloved Shyam within the gate. Suddenly she turns to Subal without speaking to Krishna and asks Subal with indignation why he has brought her to this particular bower. Ignoring Krishna, she abruptly informs Subal that she's going home. Subal, of course, offers no answer as to why he brought her there, nor is Radha really asking for one, as Subal and Vrinda then drown in their experience of Radha's Mahabhav. And if we, so here is Subal entering into and participating at the beginning of the Nisha Lila. And then turning to your section you're asking about in Sri Rupa's, I think, Viragda Madhava, right? Yeah, so there we find both Madhu Mangal and Subal play a significant role in Rupa's, it's called Venuharana Lila. So this is one of the Leelas that speaks about the stealing of Krishna's flute on the part of the gopis. And it begins with the moon rising, the cows are settled in for the night, and Krishna skipped out in the evening, and out of the milking, evening milking, and is standing on Mount Govardhan with Subal. And Subal asks Sham what the eagerness that he is seems to be suddenly possessed of that's brought him there is all about, and what he expects to gain from it by foregoing the milking and so forth. And Krishna explains that that someone described a peacock using the word Chandrakavalim, which means a fan of feathers, and to describe the bird's raised rainbow-like tail as it danced madly before him. But hearing this word, Krishna was reminded of Candravali. And at that moment, he has a longing to meet her. So, but to your point, proper understanding of the text reveals that Krishna's eagerness to meet with Candravali does not do much for Subal, who then disinterestedly suggests that Krishna, well, if you want her, call her with your flute. He doesn't volunteer immediately to run and get her. What can he say? Krishna has a desire to taste an aspect of Radha in the form of Candravali. It's part of the Leela and so forth, but what we begin to see if we look at it carefully is his affinity for Radha, which is what Subal's affinity for Radha, which is kind of what your question is about. So following Subal's suggestion, Krishna plays his flute, and then he insists that Subal should support him in his effort to attract Candravali. And Subal replies, okay, more like, if I have to. Okay, that's kind of the spirit of it. Meanwhile, Radha's somewhere in a flower hut, and near the northern pasture there along the bank of the Jamuna. And meanwhile, Candravali's stays in the southern pastures. And there, Candravali is lamenting that Krishna seldom, comes to her area, which is her way in the text of saying that she feels that Krishna loves Radha more than her. However, Padma, her Saki, is quick to inform her that no, that's not the case. And at that very moment, Krishna's nearby on the slope of Mount Govardhan, near the village and near Sakistali. So Candravali, if I recall from the text, replies in disbelief, only to hear the sound of Krishna's Murali. And thus Candravali and Krishna meet and exchange words. But the meeting goes south, if you will, when Krishna indirectly and accidentally expresses his love for Radha, while he intends to say that the fire of his separation from Candravali, that in the fire of that separation, he seeks relief from a forest stream, Dhara. Dhara means stream. He mistakenly utters Radha. And Candravali picks up on it, as does Padma, her Saki. So the whole thing goes south, and despite Krishna's excuses and efforts to convince her that he was not referring to Radha, Candravali's, for whatever she is, she's not a fool. So expressing jealous anger at first, and then hiding her face, she pretends otherwise, given her nature. Unlike Radha, so she kind of veils her anger to an extent, and feels somewhat ashamed of her anger, as Radha won't, at least in the immediate. And then, supported by Padma's logic as to the fact of Krishna's love for Radha, Candravali turns homeward. Krishna laments, but what does Subala say? And this is, I think, also very relative to your question. That Subala says, well, she didn't appear upset to me. And then Krishna explains to Subala from the signs of Candravali's face that actually she was angry with him at heart, and then she was trying to hide it. However, Subala is the point is Radhika's kinkar, and so he looks for an opportunity to turn Krishna toward her and away from Candravali at that moment. So this opportunity presents itself when Krishna decides to enter a nearby grove of bakul trees and strategize with Subala as to how to proceed. Therein, we find Krishna admiring the pleasant scenery, telling Subala, this grove with its abundance of water, niradika, means its abundance of water is very pleasant. Of course, the words niradika can be read as, instead of as niradika, as niradika, meaning without Radha. So Subala takes it that way in the latter and sees it as an opportunity to express his conviction. And so more or less he says, if Radha were here, then it would be very pleasant. So hearing this, Krishna embraces his friend and concurs and tells him to relate the truth to Alita and thereby to Radha herself. And thus, in this section of Rupa's drama, Subala's dedication to Radha is underscored in the midst of the asta-kaliya-lila, even while acquiescing with some reluctance to Krishna's desire to meet with Candravali. You, of course, have to understand that Narmasaka's position is, while similar, it's nonetheless not the same as the Manjaris. So you wouldn't find a Manjari willing, in perhaps in any way, to help Krishna meet with Candravali, but Subala's position is a little different, and it has a prominent place. So that's how we understand that section. It's actually the section that while ostensibly appears to show, well, like you questioned, seems like Subala has some affinity for Candravali. How can that be? But actually, it's a section showing his affinity for Radha. Candravali is an interesting character, of course, and she's more or less the personification of an opportunity to indirectly glorify Radha throughout the Leela. It's a glorious position. Candravali ji ki jai, Subala ki jai, Radha Madhava ki jai, Rupa Goswami ki jai, jai. So, some thoughts. What else?
Chitta, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, good morning very much. So
Good morning.
I've got a copy of a document that I think you put together some years ago. It's the asta-kaliya-lila Smaran document. And after each, it's got a one-line description of what Mahaprabhu does at that day, and then the main, I think there are verses that you took from the Govinda Lilamrita to describe what Radha and Madhava are doing. And then in between each one or after each one, it gives the corresponding section of the Maha Mantra, like Hare Krishna, the stage, from Shraddha to Prem, and then Chaitadharpan Marjanam, et cetera, et cetera. There's a couple of questions I have about this, one of which is, what exactly do we do with that information? Like, how do we apply that in our practice? That's the one question. And the other one is that in the later stages, six and seven, Leela 6 and 7. It says the stage it corresponds to is Bhav internal, and the next one is Bhav external. And that I don't know what that means. Like, how is there internal or external Bhav?
I'm not sure about that. I'd have to look at that, what I wrote there, to see what I meant. And I thought at first I recall what you're referring to what document, but now I'm not sure. And when you say what to do with the information, or what do you do, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the descriptions of the Leela, what do you do with the information?
Not the descriptions of the Leela themselves, this information that it corresponds to a particular stage. So it's like, are you supposed to meditate on for example, the Nishant Leela, and how does that correspond to the stage of Shraddha? And what do we, how does knowing that benefit us as practitioners is what I'm wondering.
Right. I think it sounds to me like, I'd have to look at the document, but like what you're referring to is something I must have written that corresponds with Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Bhajan Rahasya. In Bhajan Rahasya, Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes the asta-kaliya-lila, which is the 8 divisions in a typical day of Krishna in the apricot Leela. And he does it in connection with a explanation of Shikshastakam, and perhaps also the couplets of the names found in the Maha Mantra. Not sure about that last part. But in Bhaktivinoda's vision, the Shikshastakam verses correspond with the different stages. That's a unique contribution of his that I played out and developed in my commentary on Shikshastakam. And so I think that, I should say, typically in the Bhaktivinoda Paribar, members of the Gaudiya Math, divisions of the Gaudiya Math that don't usually think of themselves as that, although the term Bhaktivinoda Paribar that I've popularized comes originally from Bhakti Siddhanta. They would go to Kartik anyway, and they would read the Bhajan Rahasya daily and do kirtan and lecture and so forth in parikram. The idea of Bhaktivinoda seems to be to help sadhakas who need to understand where they are on the ladder progress, and in doing so in relation to becoming acquainted at the same time with the prayojan tattva, entering the apricot Leela and how it works and so forth. So I think his emphasis there is on adhikar, eligibility, how to apply yourself. For example, when he comes to the higher stages of ruchi, asakti, and bhava, he gives cautions and so forth, but nonetheless gives us information about those leelas. So I think that look at, for example, in some missions, or one in particular that I'm familiar with that most of us know about, it's a big one, they're Prabhupada had to say sometimes in his own movement, gopis aren't bad. When he would give cautions, about higher things and not to be preoccupied with something that you don't have adhikar for. Focus, where you are in the here and now. If you want to go there, you have to know where you are here and now as well. But you have to know both. So you can't throw out, where you want to go. Gopis aren't bad is his way of saying that. We should know something about them. But we should know that we're here, but we should know who they are too. So I think that Bhaktivinoda Thakur is trying to give sadhakas acquaintance with the asta-kaliya-lila in the context of an emphasis on gradually passing through the stages of bhakti step by step and knowing where one's at in that through the progress through the method of Nam Sankirtan. So he's kind of bundling that all together. Now, your question also is what to do with this kind of information, so to speak. How do you do this? One thing that I think is worth noting is that the main emphasis in his own words of in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna's Kavira says this book is really centered on the Madhya Lila. He glorifies Vrindavan Das Thakur and defers to him for his emphasis on the Adi Lila, which is where we want to enter. We want to enter into Navadvip. And before Mahaprabhu ever leaves, of course he doesn't in the Aprakat Lila, takes sannyas and so forth. From the time that he's a Vaishnav to before taking sannyas in that period. That's the period where Nityananda Prabhu came for about a year, maybe a year and a half at most, before Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to South India and began the Madhya Lila. So we want to enter into that Nadia Lila, and the beauty of Navadvip Lila in the Prakat Lila, the manifest Lila, is the main focus of Vrindavan Das Thakur. It's one of the reasons why Krishna Das defers to him. His emphasis, as I say in his own words, is the Madhya Lila, which is the greater bulk of Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it's the teachings how to go there, how to enter into the Kirtan hall of Srivas Thakur. Not anybody could get in. Mahaprabhu wasn't letting anybody in, but there were nice people outside that didn't feel qualified but wanted to. He came out for them and took a Sankirtan to the streets for them, and he took sannyas for them, as Bhagavatam says in the 11th canto. Aranya, he took sannyas for chased after us. And so he shows the way as in his Krishna in his Acharya Lila. So the main focus is Sankirtan and as it's played out in the Madhya Lila, and there the teachings are coming out. Teachings to Sanatan, Rupa Goswami, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Prakasandana Saraswati, the converts and so forth. And so much Sambandha Gyan is given. And then what we find is that by the force of this practice, with some knowledge, theoretical knowledge and insight into the ideal, hearing about it, again, gopis aren't bad. Gopas aren't bad. It's focusing on Chaita Darpana Marjanam and the beginning stages and Bhava Mahadavagani Nivapanam, Trinadapi Sunichena. I mean, this is a huge emphasis of Krishnadas. Trinadapi, this third verse of Shikshastaka, and so forth. Now, as Mahaprabhu is absorbed in the Sankirtan and showing the way in the Madhya Lila, he's a public person, and he becomes, by the force of his kirtan, which takes him into internal meditation, he becomes a private person. He leaves the public sphere. He can't function in the public sphere. Now, the asta-kaliya-lila is not teaching how to do it, how to do, Bhava Bhakti, so to speak. It's a madness. It's happening. It's a result of the absorption in Sankirtan. It has some method to it of sorts, but it's for mad people. So it's not, and this is the emphasis of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, it's not to be imitated. Some people try to make a method out of it, so to speak. And to some extent, you there's things you can say about it, and you can hone your focus and so forth, and hear, as we should, from certain sections of the Lila that emphasize or describe our ideal. Like, for example, we're writing a book about Sakya Ras. Devotees who have that ideal will appreciate it, get some insight about it, and so forth. But what will you do with that? Yeah. So you have to focus on where you're at, apply yourself, and have that ideal. So again, asta-kaliya-lila is not like how to. That's not what it's doing. The Madhya-lila is how to. Asta-kaliya-lila is what the madness that came out of the method of the madness. So one part is the method, that's the main part. The madness, well, that happens. And so, I've given an example before. There was a young girl, she was pregnant for the first time. And so she was concerned as it was getting on that she might go into labor any minute. And the doctor had advised so. So she told her mother, I'm going to take some rest. Wake me up if I go into labor. Her mother laughed and said, you won't need to be woken up when you go into labor. How do I know if I've attained bhava? Well, you won't need to be told that. And you won't need to be told what to do for the most part either. But there's some theory, that can be taught about that. And look at the section of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Or excuse me, Bhakti Rasamrita, long section on sadhana bhakti. Section on Bhava Bhakti is very short comparatively. Of course, it then goes on to describe rasa and the different rasas and so forth. That's important theoretical knowledge and so forth. So, in one sense, I'm giving kind of a broad answer what to do with it. When you come out here, as you're going to do within a month or so, we can talk more, and I appreciate your concern. But I think there's a way in which we can take that information and focus on our goal, and appropriately, even in sadhana bhakti, as much as we focus on shraddha and saranagati, some measure of longing will come as well. And that should be cultivated. And then Bhava Bhakti, of course, is characterized not by shraddha and saranagati, but by longing. And longing becomes the way there. So again, I'm sorry, I don't, if I had could see what exactly you're referring to, I might be able to answer better, but that's my answer for today. Hope it helps.
That works.
Okay. What else?
Jeremy?
Guru Maharaj, I have one question. I am in Kansas, and my devotee family here has started to do outdoor programs now, and we're going to be selling Ram Navami soon. Sorry, I had a tongue twister. Could you tell us, or just in short, what do you think the most important lesson about Krishna's incarnation as Ram is for devotees and aspiring devotees?
Well, yes, Ram Navami is coming. There are some Ram Bhaktas in our Gaudiya Sampradaya. It has its breadth and its depth. So in terms of its breadth, it may pick up persons with affinity for Ram Lila also, and deliver them in ways that even other sampradayas focused on that could not as well. The power and the grace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We find Murari Gupta, for example, Mahaprabhu identified him as Hanuman. Of course, he's a Nityasiddha, but appearing in his Leela. So there are the Ram Bhaktas also that were delivered by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and they were delivered Ram Bhakti, the brother of Rup Sanatan, Anupam, some South Indian devotees when Mahaprabhu toured there, and so forth. In that spirit, in relation to the breadth of Mahaprabhu's movement and the far-reaching efficacy of his Nam mantra, Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, that can have, from which different meanings can be drawn. Prabhupada established in some places like Bombay, along with his deities of Radha and Krishna and Gaurnitai, deities of Sita and Ram. I think you can find there in many Ram Bhaktas, if you will, in Bombay. Although they may not be well educated in Siddhanta of any particular sampradaya, not in a sampradayic sense, but somehow, I mean, there are 2,000 versions of the Valmiki Ramayana. It's available in many, many dialects. I was researching this recently a little bit, and particularly the Kirtibas Bengali edition of Ramayana. Basically, what I'm talking about is the Valmiki Ramayana, whatever that is. You could think about it in the traditional sense, or you could think about it in an academic way, of it being a compilation of events, or the inspired insight of Valmiki. But in the different locales, the story of Ram has been retold throughout India by poets and sadhus with affinity for Ram Leela, and in that they will incorporate some aspect of Bengali culture, Telugu culture, Kashmiri, Ram. The story is the same, but there are some additions. I like the part, and this is why I was researching it in the Bengali edition, where Kirtibas makes the addition of Tarani Sen. Tarani Sen is the son of Vibhishan, who's the brother of Ram, who defected, of Ravana, defected and went to Ram's party. And so at some point, Ram sees a necessity to call on Tarani Sen to rise to the occasion, enter the battle. He's young, and he's a Ram Bhakta, as his father was, Vibhishan. So he thinks, then now I have the chance to see Ram, and if I get slain by him, and get out of this Rakshasa body. How did I get here? So he's inspired, and he tattoos the name of Ram all over his body, and enters the war. And he comes before Bibhishan and pays obeisances to his father, and then to Ram. And Ram thinks, he's a very nice demon. He's such a nice fellow. I mean, and he says nice things and so forth. And Bibhishan says, kill him. You got to kill him. You got to kill him. And it's not known to Ram that this is who he is. And Bibhishan's not giving any information. And so, but Ram says, how am I going to kill him? I can't shoot him anywhere because wherever he's got Ram Nam printed all over his body. So Bibhishan says, well, you got to shoot him on the tongue. He says, well, his tongue is always vibrating Ram Nam. So how can I kill him? So then Bibhishan says, well, you got to get in between he says Ram before he says the next one. Then you have to. So taking Vibhishan's advice, he slays the Tarani Sen, who's overjoyed in ecstasy. He's been slain by Ram, and Vibhishan collapses also. And then so Ram says, why did you collapse? Ostensibly, it appears that he collapsed because then he tells Ram, that was my son. So everybody thinks, oh, it's his son. He sacrificed his son for Ram. But the real purport is that he was in ecstasy. He collapsed in ecstasy. My son has attained Ram's grace, in this form, which I wanted for him, And for me, it had to come in this way. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, obviously, but it's something I've been interested in, because in the Subal Mangal, it's stated that in Ram Lila, Subal incarnates as Taran Hussain. Subal Saka ki jai, Taran Hussain ki jai. So, so Krishna Lila and Ram Lila are intertwined, right? And the way that we Gaudiyas tend to look at Ram Lila in one sense is that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the way. He's showing the way, right? He is Krishna. He's showing the way to attain him. And his method for, one of his tools in doing that is to accept the order of sannyas, which will bring respect to him so that people will listen to him. And in his sannyas, he is very, very strict. So the Maryada that pervades Ram Lila, the righteousness of Ram, the duty to Dharma, at whatever the cost may be, however it may make me personally uncomfortable, perhaps, I will. So Ram sacrificed. He was going to be the king, and nothing could give more pleasure to the kingdom and to his father than his accepting the throne. But as you know, in order that his father might not be called a liar, and that his promise to, who was it, Kaushalya, or is it Kaushalya or Kaikaya? Kaikeya, not be broken. He had promised her that if you want any benediction at some point, you ask, I will give it. She asked for the benediction that Bharat be given the crown and that Ram be banished. So Ram wanted that his father word would be upheld at the cost of such trauma. And of course, he went into the forest. So, example of the dharmic nature. He's the Dhirodatta personality amongst the four Nayaka type of heroes in the Indian aesthetics. Krishna's the Dhira Lalita. Of course, we won't go into all. Anyway, so Ram, righteous. So the righteousness of Ram, the morality of Ram, the dutifulness, the dharmicness of Ram is there in the sannyas of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Therefore, when he showed his six-armed formed at times, there were the two arms of Ram, the two arms of Krishna holding the flute, Ram with the bow and arrow, and himself, of course, with the kamandalu, the water pot, and the danda of the sannyasi. So the morality, the righteousness, Mahaprabhu taught, by example. He emphasized this, that example speaks louder than precept. His conversions were largely by his example. They were followed often by siksha. But it was his example that created teachable moments. So we look at the influence of Ram, in a sense, Ram Lila, there in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's sannyas, and we also look at Ram Lila, which is a known place. Ram Lila and Ayodhya, the Dham of Ayodhya, within the expanse of Vaikuntha, is a known commodity. Goloka, that's not very well known. People in Vaikuntha know about Ayodhya. They don't know about Goloka. Goodness. They know about Krishna. They know something about Krishna Lila. They think that's a face of Narayan. He shows some time, but you can't really take part in it. It's pretty neat. But he shows it on Janmashtami here in Vaikuntha. This Lila. But they don't know that you could participate in it, that you could interact with God like that. It just doesn't equate, for them. That doesn't make any sense for them. It would turn Vaikuntha upside down. So they don't know about Goloka. This is the glory of the Goswamis. They're bringing out the text. Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
I can hear you.
Yeah, you're frozen.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing too.
Yeah.
Aw.
Here he is. He's back on.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Not hearing you. Okay, now.
Now. Hello. So I don't know where you lost me, but I was saying that in Vaikuntha, they don't know about Goloka. It doesn't compute for them. They know about Krishna. He shows himself, Narayan shows himself as Krishna. So the glory of the Goswamis is that they bring out the fact that Goloka exists. I mean, the whole second canto of Gopal Champu, Jiva Goswami's final work, or one of the final works, is all about the fact that there's a dham, there's a place that corresponds with this kind of love of the Brajabasis, of the gopis in particular, who are highlighted in the first canto of Gopal Champu. So there is a place. It's called Golok. It's unknown in Vaikuntha, whereas Ayodhya is a known commodity. But from our point of view, if you look at Ayodhya, what does Ram Lila tell us? Ram Lila tells us, this is curious. It looks like there is a possibility of having Vatsalya for God, of having Sakya with God, and maybe a more romantic type of Madhurya. Really, the Madhurya of Lakshmi is very much Dasya. Because in Ram Lila, unlike the rest of Vaikuntha, God as Narayan has a mother and a father. Whoa, what's that all about? He has his brothers and Lakshman in particular, the Balaram of Ram Lila, and the fraternal love. This is not possible with Narayan. So there's a place in Vaikuntha called Ayodhya, and it's properly understood from the Gaudiya perspective. It's pointing to this possibility exists. Where can it be found? You can't enter into Ram Lila and be like Lakshman. You can't enter in and be like Sita. It's not like Ram's got lots of Sitas up there or handmaidens. He's Ekpatni Vrata. He took a vow for monogamy. But it's possible. That's why he told the rishis at Dandakaranya, yes, I am the one you're meditating on, but in this form, you can't have Gopi Bhav with me. In another form, I will come and pick you up in the Prakat Lila, in my Krishna Lila. And there's an abode that corresponds with that. Some rishis could understand by his grace. So the point is that Ram Lila is, if we look at it, there's a possibility. Wow, this is interesting. God with a mother and a father, God with friends, a couple, Lakshman, Bharat. And so it's pointing to Vaikuntha, the possibilities. Pointing to Goloka. It's a stepping stone. Those possibilities exist, and Ram Lila is human-like. It's not that human-like because nobody could be as dharmic as Ram, then you realize this guy's not got to be God. No one can be like that. No one can be like that. So we see some of that in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as I say, and we see Ram Leela as pointing in the direction of the possibilities of Krishna Leela in Goloka. Those are some thoughts on Ram Leela Ki Jai. So went on a little bit there, too much, too long. Still didn't answer all the questions today. I'm sorry. But hope to be with you next week. And thank you all for your kind questions and participation this morning. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari Bol.
Hari Hari Bol.
Thank you, Gurudev.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Before everyone goes, I just want to make a few announcements. Just want to give you a reminder that on this same kind of Zoom link, there are classes every day. Okay, so on Mondays, Padmanabha Swami is giving classes. Is it? Yeah. It's not on the same link.